So our next speaker is Natalia Mirón-Florido, who holds a bachelor's degree in English Studies and a master's degree in Comparative Literature and Literary Studies from the University of the Basque Country. She is currently a PhD student in the program of Comparative Literature and Literary Studies, and her research covers numerous topics such as postcoloniality, West-East cultural interactions, gender, disability, queerness, and speciesism. And she seeks to create a space in academia for queer and autistic people like herself. So whenever you want, Natalia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. I want to start by reminding everyone that there's still a genocide happening in Gaza. And I want to thank the university and ICA for giving me the platform to share this message and my presentation as well. So let's just jump in. Well, wait, there you go. So I want to ask you, what constitutes animal resistance? In Fear of the Animal Planet, Rubal explains that it takes place in an oppressive environment where the systematic consequences of not complying are known to the individuals. The defiance of this oppression is hence conscious, purposeful, determined, and embarked on out of a desire of freedom. So this definition is not without its deterrents. For instance, questions whether Rubal is creating analogies with human feelings and moral values. Similarly, Pearson indicates that in his eagerness to prove animal agency, Rubal overdoes it and shifts to anthropomorphizing animal resistance. Colling offers an alternative that builds on Rubal's definition but is arguably broader. She continues to stress the idea that non-human animals desire freedom and are capable of conscious and purposeful resistance. However, she also recognizes that intentionality is not needed, nor is the awareness of a system of oppression. Most importantly, she points out that animals' behaviors are not always understood by humans, and indeed there are acts of resistance that are not recognized as such by humans because they do not align with human ideas of resistance. So in her chapter, The Silence and the Fury, Violet Pouillard builds on Collins' research. Her point of contention is that animal resistance is too focused on active resistance, in particular that which affects humans. She argues that studies on animal agency should also consider how this agency is constrained by an oppressive system. She criticizes the fact that much scholarship marginalizes the vast majority of non-human animal individuals who do not resist oppression and denies their rehabilitation as historical actors. With this in mind, Pouillard proposes a framework to analyze a wider variety of animal behaviors and provides three typologies of animal resistance: raucous, silenced, and silent resistance. So raucous resistance is what we would understand as direct resistance because it affects animals' oppressors. It is also premeditated and intentional, as it frequently targets particular individuals, human individuals. Similarly, many of these animals elaborate plans to escape. And this is backed by ethological studies that point out that this behavior is not an outlier, but rather a mark, for instance, of the species intelligence. Pouillard argues that what follows an attempt at raucous resistance is silence resistance. It is built on the understanding that resistance is a relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor, and admits that as humans, we do not know enough about animals to recognize what constitutes an act of resistance for them. Silencing animal resistance includes restraining and harming the individual in their recapture, reframing this escape as not as an act of resistance but as an abnormal accident, and further confining or even murdering the animal to prevent more accidents. So constant silencing of animal resistance results in individuals that experience psychological torture in the form of constant stress, frustration, fear, etc. This torture results in coping mechanisms commonly referred to as stereotypic behaviors, that is to say, stereotypical movements like pacing, swaying, self-harm, etc. Pouillard signals these as attempts to replace an action that is impossible to realize, for instance, escaping or relieving some sort of pain, and thus also constitute a last resort resistance. So with this framework in mind, Pouillard wants to emphasize that animal resistance takes many different forms because it is relational and highly dependent on the animal's asymmetric situation in regards to human oppression. I mean, oppression by humans. So I want to use this framework to look at animal behavior in Avatar to see if we may have sidelined any attempts at animal resistance because they just didn't look like resistance to us. So far there are 3 movies. I am sort of assuming you are kind of familiar with the plot in general. You don't really need to know the plot. What you do need to know is that the anthropomorphic animals in Avatar, the Na'vi, the indigenous alien species, have a much more direct contact with animals than we do on Earth. They can connect to other species using their kuru, the braid. This is in fact an exposed part of their nervous system, which they can connect to other animals' kurus, thus allowing the Na'vi to command the animal through mental commands. So I will be focusing my analysis on these 4 animals, the tulkun, the ilu, the tsurak, and the ikran, as these are the ones that are more relevant in the franchise. So let's start with Avatar 1 and the ikran. So the most explicit example of this species behavior we have is the scene where the protagonist, Jake, has to tame an ikran to become a warrior. A wild ikran's behavior directly affects the Na'vi as they react violently when the Na'vi approach them. This reaction, it appears, is rather intentional and targeted, as Neytiri, the female protagonist, says that ikrans choose to try to kill particular individuals. The ikrans are shown evading capture and fighting strategically, for instance, hitting the Na'vis in the head so that they faint and the ikrans can avoid capture. This is apparently common behavior among ikrans, enough that the Na'vi have been able to extract a norm about how the taming of the ikran works. First contact with ikrans is thus consistent with raucous behavior. So what follows is Jake silencing the ikran's resistance in order to tame him. He starts by physically restricting him so that he can join the kurus. The attitude of other Na'vi give the interaction a highly heroic and ritualistic nature, and sidelines the ikran's resistance as his way of choosing Jake as a rider. Once Jake has joined the kurus, he mentally commands the ikran to shut up and fly straight in order to seal the bond. From then on, the ikran will fly with no one but Jake. Along the rest of the film, Jake repeatedly puts his ikran in situations that the animal clearly dislikes and has not chosen. This includes approaching the giant tsuraks, which is like a sort of gigantic ikran, and is also the ikran's natural predator, to which the ikran responds by repeatedly swaying and roaring. This, I believe, is a silent act of resistance, as it can be interpreted as a stereotypic behavior, but rather than relieve the cause of the ikran's pain, Jake pushes forward because the ikran is simply a tool for him to reach Tsuraks. Okay, so the first film shows that animal oppression by the Na'vi is positive, natural and ritualistic. Animals and ikrans in particular are valued for their utility and are systematically dominated and silenced for the sake of the Na'vi. their capacity for resistance is gradually restricted, until silent resistance is all that is left to them. And I'm running really late. With this, let's move on to movie 2 and tsuraks and the tulkuns. Jake's first interaction with a tsurak is very similar to that with the ikran in the first movie, except for the fact that the tsurak is being restrained by other individuals. The tsurak's behavior could be interpreted as raucous, but given that the animal does not attack his captors, which he's shown to be able to do, and simply sways and roars, I would argue this is more of an instance of silent resistance, or maybe silenced resistance. Yet the movie gradually moves on from what we understood to be the usual dynamics between non-human animals and human animals in the planet through the figure of the tulkun. So Pouillard is an alien whale that has experienced human aggression, and he has been silenced in his resistance. He has been classified as an outcast. He is blamed by other tulkun and Navi because his resistance brought about the death of many Navi and animals, however, in a way that is inverse to the taming of the ikran. In the first movie, the second movie advocates for the right to raucous resistance. Loak, Jake's youngest son, takes away the harpoon that Pouillard has in his fin, and then the audience is shown that Pouillard's resistance was actually in response to his mother being killed, thus reframing his crime within Tulkun society as an act of righteousness. Finally, Pouillard is central in the final fight against the human invaders who have continued to hurt Tulkuns. By destroying their ship, Pouillard impedes further actions against his species. So Pouillard's resistance in this fight is undoubtedly raucous. We know that tulkuns are extremely intelligent and capable of planning and premeditation, and his movements and attacks are very targeted at individuals, in particular to Scoresby, the man who killed his mother and whose arm he rips off. So what the second movie shows is that this other clan, this sea clan, the Metkayina, has a very different relationship to animals, and it's much more interdependent. Animals are not valued simply as mounts or sources of food, but also as spirit siblings whom they depend on to survive, just like certain animals depend on the Metkayina to survive. The anger they show at the murder of this random ilu, an animal that is theoretically easily replaced, shows that they deeply value the animal's life, irrespective of their relationship to the Navi. And finally, we're jumping to film 3, focused on the tulkun and the ikran. So the first appearance of the ikrans in this movie seems to readdress animal oppression by the Navi. The Navi are shown in deep grief when their ikrans are hurt, and the camera spends a lot of time focusing on the animal's face and movements. For instance, an ikran shot with an arrow is seen in pain and struggling to get up as her companion strokes her and asks for forgiveness. Similarly, when an ikran is hurt mid-flight and holds onto ropes together with his Navi, the two look at each other and the Navi extends his hand in anguish when the ikran finally lets go. Ikrans, let's remember, bond with riders for life. This scene showed that the cost of weaponization of ikrans imply for both animals and Navi, and that the loss of one part of the dichotomy is as grievous regardless of whether this is the Navi or the ikran. Yet the film seems to imply that animals have no right to raucous resistance, no matter how well justified. Indeed, Pouillard is judged for his transgressions in the previous movie and his attempts to get other tulkuns to fight against humans. He is ultimately found guilty and exiled for his raucous resistance. When the final battle is approaching, the tulkuns are asked to participate, and their pacifism comes across as a bit nonsensical, because how can they deny themselves the right to raucous resistance based on an ancient tradition? Yes, killing does create more killing, but their pacifist stance is only possible because tulkuns are apex predators. But now that humans have a right to Pandora, this is no longer the case. So what will happen if they continue to hold this stance? What will happen is what happened to Tanuk, the sole survivor of Pouillard's birth clan. Her body, laden with harpoons, shots, blinded, is the proof of what silent resistance may lead to for a species. As she says, she speaks for the dead mothers and the dead calves. Our songs gone forever. I am the last blind witness to our end. Tannock's life experience is the proof that not only is raucous resistance a right for animals, many times it is a must. It is the only way to ensure their survival, and it is a fight in which all living creatures must participate, and I'm almost reaching the conclusions, and I will be very fast. The movie effectively backs up the animals' right to resist and express rage for their mistreatment, and even to seek revenge for the genocide that has been perpetrated against them. So I'm going to very fastly reach some conclusion. What does this mean? Well, I think that at the very least, this is shown a sort of evolution in the issue of animal oppression and animal resistance, however small. The first film was heavily criticized for portraying Navi animal dynamics, and I think much of the second and third film is actually a response to that. Secondly, why is this important? There's a lot of talk about how these movies have no cultural impact, but I think it is undeniable that it is very popular, and having a franchise question the normalization of animal oppression on a screen as well as on the real world can be very valuable. And finally, how do we fix or improve this? Well, I think the clear answer is that animals need to be more at the center. There's a chance for them to explore Navi oppression of animals, which would also have the added benefit of showing that Navi are not an ideal society, which is also something that has been criticized by indigenous societies. So I do think it is unlikely this will happen in the films, but now there are comics and video games and all that, so maybe somewhere, someday, a woman can dream. That woman is me. And that's that.